Prajanyasya prajapate Sashishna upastastu Prajatyanandani vrite. Can you come with the mic, Prabhu? You can take it. Come take it.
Apamviryasya sargasya
Apambiryasya sargasya
Prajanyasya prajapatehe
Prajanyasya prajapatehe
Sa shishna upashtastu
Sashishna upastastu
Prajatyananda nivritehe
Prajatyanandani vrite.
Apamvirasya sargasya
Apambiryasya sargasya
Arjanyasya prajapatehe
Prajanyasya prajapatehe
Sa shishna upastastu
Sashishna upastastu
Prajati ananda nivritehe
Prajatyanandani vrite.
Apamviryasya sargasya
Apambiryasya sargasya
Arjanyasya prajapatehe
Prajanyasya prajapatehe
Pumsa shishna upastastu
Sashishna upastastu
Prajatyananda nivritehe
Prajatyanandani vrite.
Apamviryasya sargasya
Apambiryasya sargasya
Arjanyasya prajapatehe
Prajanyasya prajapatehe
Pumsa shishna upastastu
Sashishna upastastu
Prajatyananda nivritehe
Prajatyanandani vrite. A bomb of water, Yuryasya of the semen, Sargasya of the generative, Parjanyasya of rains, Prajapatehe of the creator, Pumsaha of the Lord, Shishnaha the genitals, Upastaha two, the place where the genitals are situated, Prajati due to begetting, Ananda pleasure, Nivrite cause. Translation. From the Lord's genitals originate water, semen, generatives, rains, and procreators. His genitals are the cause of a pleasure. The genitals and the pleasure of begetting counteract the distresses of family encumbrances. One would cease to generate altogether if there were not, by the grace of the Lord, a coating, a pleasure-giving substance on the surface of the generative organs. This substance gives a pleasure so intense that it counteracts fully the distress of family encumbrances. A person is so captivated by this pleasure-giving substance that he is not satisfied by begetting a single child, but increases the number of children with great risk in regard to maintaining them, simply for this pleasure-giving substance. This pleasure-giving substance is not false, however, because it originates from the transcendental body of the Lord. In other words, the pleasure-giving substance is a reality, but it has taken on an aspect of pervertedness on account of material contamination. In the material world, sex life is the cause of many distresses on account of material contact. Therefore, the sex life in the material world should not be encouraged beyond the necessity. There is a necessity for generating progeny, even in the material world, but such generation of children must be carried out with full responsibility for spiritual values. The spiritual values of life can be realized in the human form of material existence, and the human being must adopt family planning with reference to the context of spiritual values, not otherwise. The degraded form of family restriction by use of contraceptives, etc., is the grossest type of material contamination. Materialists who use these devices want to fully utilize the pleasure potency of the coating on the genitals by artificial means, without knowing the spiritual importance, and without knowledge of spiritual values. The less intelligent man tries to utilize only the material sense pleasure of the genitals. Apam viryasya sargasya parjanyasya prajapatehe pumsa shishna upastastu prajatyanandani vrite. Translation. From the Lord's genitals originate water, semen, generatives, rains, and procreators. His genitals are the cause of a pleasure that counteracts the distress of begetting. So we're hearing the elaborations of the Virat Purusha, the universal form of the Lord. And in this text, we're hearing that the Lord's genitals are the source of water, semen, generatives, rains, and procreators, as well as his genitals, or the genitals of his universal form, are the cause of a pleasure that counteracts the distress of begetting. So the word praja, this word prajati, right? And then whenever it's next to an A, then it becomes a Y. So it becomes prajatyananda. And so prajati is due to begetting. So we hear prajapati, right? Which means a prajapati is one who's a progenitor, starting with Lord Brahma. Then there's many persons who are employed or instructed to make, generate bodies and give facility for conditioned souls to enter this material world. So this praja means those who are under the control of the king or the people that are born in a certain area. So this prajati means begetting. So when we actually beget some offspring, there's so many troubles. And the troubles are so exaggerated, especially in this day and age, due to the unfortunate situation of Kali Yuga, that hardly anybody is really very much interested to beget any children. Because actually they know that it's simply going to be troublesome. And so what? Materialistic society is saying, I want the pleasure of contact with the, with the opposite sex according to my body, but I don't want any of the natural causes of that connection. So I'll employ any type of devices, science, research, pills, etc., to do away with the unpleasant, reactions for getting that pleasure. And I'll one up material nature. I'll conquer over material nature. Material nature says, if you contact with your reproductive organs the other gender, then child is born naturally. And I will conquer over nature. I will use this XYZ, device to defeat nature. But we are understanding that the laws of nature are very complex. And by employing the use of contraceptives, we're actually going to get a very unfortunate result, which we were not planning for whatsoever. This knowledge is somewhat hanging on here and there. When actually, by Krishna's grace, when I was in high school, there was a type of sexual education course, which is not required because everybody knows naturally young boy and young girl are automatically attracted to each other. It's yuvati nam yatha yuni. Then there's another part of it. It's part of the Vedas, Vishnu Purana. I think it's quoted by Rupa Goswami, where he states that young boy and girl, their minds are spontaneously attracted to each other. The mind of a young boy is spontaneously attracted to a young girl, and the mind of a young girl is spontaneously attracted to a young boy. There's no need for introductions. As soon as they get a little intimate, very easily, next stages, this is discussed. Actually, Prabhupada discusses this when he touches on the mode of passion in the Bhagavad Gita. He states that, when a young boy and a young girl meet, right, there's a little intimacy, a little association. Then he is, by the mode of passion, his senses drive him to see, to touch, and to engage in sexual acts. So this attraction is characterized, the mode of passion is characterized by this attraction between the opposite genders in a particular species. In a particular species. I like to mention that point because it's not like it helps give a little space. I'm just feeling the pressure of this attraction so acutely because I'm particularly embodied in this species of life. Therefore, I particularly feel the acute attraction for the opposite gender, which is in the same species of life. There's an unlimited quantity of living entities in the opposite gender that I have nothing to do with. I don't want to do anything with them when it comes down to this. But because I'm in this form of life, then I actually want to engage with the opposite gender in this form of life. So it kind of gives some space and it helps understand, hey, what's going on here? I'm not this body. So my real business is to satisfy my real needs, as Prabhupada mentioned, spiritual values. So family life, family planning. So Prabhupada coined that way before. What I was going to say is that when I was in high school, by the grace of Krishna, there were still some traditionalists that had some impact in that, area. And they came to our middle school. Yeah, middle school. It was like we were like 12, 13, and they were instructing us in sexual education. And one thing that I took away is, by the grace of Krishna, they said the best contraceptive is abstinence. That's a fact. That's a fact. And all the other stuff, we're not very much interested in. So the Vedic culture is based on this principle that family planning means you receive spiritual training, receive occupational training, and when you're fully qualified with blessings from superiors, then you enter into family life in a very regulated way according to the Shastras, the Dharma Shastras, the Manu Samhita, specific rules and regulations which guide one to not get distracted. It's stated in the Bhagavatam that this sex attraction is the binding principle of the material world, and that as soon as there's a union between the male and female of the same gender, of the same species, then there's a binding. There's a binding of the heart. The heart becomes bound up between those two. And what happens by that? Then he starts to feel very much attached to his body, to his land, to his family, to his money, to his properties, all these things. So by this connection in the heart, which is very tight between these two conditioned souls, misidentifying with their bodies in the first place, it becomes even more agitated, more aggravated. It becomes more pronounced simply by contact, simply by this union, because there's a pleasure potency, there's a pleasure giving substance, a coating. Prabhupada calls it a coating on the generative organs. And everyone in the material world is searching for this feeling. They're just searching for the feeling. It's just a feeling. It's very insignificant. It's like Prabhupada, as well as the Shastras, describe it as it's a type of an itch. It's a sensation that we're mad after, and the mind becomes mad after experiencing this sensation, which is derived from this pleasure-giving coating on the generative organs. So when we hear about it like this, it seems, it's pretty strange. It's kind of like very scientific type of analysis, very, it kind of detaches us from the heat of the moment. When we start getting hot, when we start getting, passionate, we feel that rise. I must act. I must get the pleasure. I must attain that sensation. I must. Wow, that's probably a good time to slow down, to think about it clearly, because it's just a feeling. We have to think, who am I? This question we have to ask again, who am I? Am I this body? Right? Am I a slave to the sensations which my mind is demanding? No, I'm a spirit soul. So we enter into family life with reference to the context of spiritual values and not otherwise. So that takes training. In the Vedic society, man and woman are meant to receive training prior to entering into family life. They can understand chastity, celibacy, aiming towards the pleasure of the Supreme Lord. All aiming towards the pleasure of the Supreme Lord. Sangsid here, Hari Toshanam. We should perform our duties as man, woman, etc. in society for the ultimate pleasure of Hari. So we do that with this too. Not that we just try to satisfy this or use our genitals for sense pleasure without knowledge of spiritual values. So it's a cultivation, and the general society needs a lot of help in this regard, because the biggest leaders, the persons who are pumping sound vibration into our ears and into our eyes, into our consciousness, they're mad after this little pleasure, this little sensation. And all the songs, they're about this. All the skyscrapers, they're about this. All the business proposals, all the arrangements between nations, if you want to boil it down and down and down and down, it's about this. Because this is turning the material consciousness in this material world. Because ultimately we think we're this body. And the highest pleasure attainable is to somehow tap into this little coating. Tap into this little coating on the generative organs. It's perplexing. It's bewildering. And actually, it's stated that Cupid, when the opposite sex, when they meet, when you look into the eyes of the opposite gender, there are some arrows that are immediately tossed by Kamadev. And these are scientifically described. Somebody may have the reference, but there's different types of arrows which do different things. Immediately he becomes stunned and he starts to meditate on the form. Wow. That is really something. Then, boom, he starts to become like he's on fire. He becomes bewildered. He becomes completely enchanted. He becomes fiery. He has to engage. He has to communicate. He has to associate. He has to get closer. And then so on. So these things are scientifically described. But the general, thing is, Kamadev has some weapons, and Cupid, he is working for Krishna, and we have to. He's working with the material energy, and this is the greatest trick, of Maya. This has us spinning again and again and again in this material world. So we pray that we can learn, that we can attain knowledge of spiritual values. And so even we navigate our spiritual life aspiring for spiritual values in it, whichever ashram, grihastha ashram, brahmachari ashram, vanapras, sannyas, we are searching after the attainment of spiritual values. So we gain knowledge. So gaining knowledge, that there's nothing so sublime as transcendental knowledge. Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita. And we're just praying to hear the words from the spiritual master to have our conscience purified. By hearing from the spiritual master, right, all the inauspicious things in the heart are destroyed almost until nil. By hearing the Bhagavatam, by hearing the pastimes of the Lord, So this is the medicine, as we were hearing a few days ago. This is the medicine to hear, right? This is the proper treatment, and the diet is to take Krishna Prasadam. So everybody, no matter which ashram we're in, we got the same program. Hear, chant, read, study, preach, take prasad, worship the deity. We'll get there. We'll get there if we stick to it and we're sincere. And if we decide to chase this little pleasure without knowledge of the spiritual values, which have to be imbued into our family life, then we'll be on the animal platform and we'll receive that type of birth due to the will of the Lord, the Lord's arrangement. We won't have learned the lesson. So actually, the human form of life is meant for tapasya, specifically tapo divyam, divine austerities, not to act as the animals. There's one verse which states that if we think we're this body, if we think that we should just go to a holy place to take a bath, if we think that our nation is very worshipable, the land which we were born, then saeva golkara, we're like an ass or a cow. And if we go chasing this material sense pleasure, which is actually very much a troublesome aspect to life, then what happens is we're like a camel. And the camel is always biting thorns because he thinks it tastes nice. He doesn't know he's puncturing his own lips and tongue and his gums. If you can imagine some thorns, the mouth is kind of like a sensitive organ. It's a very strange arrangement, this mouth. There's like these raised portions of gums, and the skin there is kind of sensitive skin. And as soon as there's something sharp, that's going to be cut very easily, that surface. And the camel is relishing that little taste of blood. It's a very strange condition of ignorance. And that's like us. We go chasing this pleasure, not understanding how much troubles we will incur going forward. So we don't want to live a grihamedi lifestyle. Grihamedi means ignore the spiritual values, just chase sense pleasure in the name of society, family, and love. Society, friendship, and love, right? But Grihastha says, let me add Krishna. Let me add the spiritual values from Bhagavad Gita. The Bhagavad Gita, the Bhagavatam is the same for a Grihastha man and also a Brahmachari. It's not like we have a different book. This is really interesting concept. In the Bhagavad Gita, we learn sense control. We learn how to redirect our engagements to Krishna's service. We understand meditation, yoga, right? These things are the same for any human being. So we're meant to take this up, learn it nicely, and then apply it. And we don't have to be dragged around by this pleasure chasing, mentality. We can be very hungry. Stay hungry for spiritual advancement. Stay hungry for service opportunities. Stay hungry. Stay on the chase for the pleasure derived from satisfying the spiritual master. And that type of pleasure is unlimitedly greater. It's stated by the great acharyas that the pleasure derived in this material world is not false. Prabhupada touched on that. Rupa Goswami and other acharyas, they say, it's real. Okay, we'll give it to you. It's real. There's some pleasure. It's like a drop in the ocean. I mean, it's a drop in the desert when you're so thirsty. A drop in the desert. What good is a drop for us when we're dying of thirst? So we are Nandamaya Vyasat. We need pleasure. We are pleasure seeking. We ourselves on the spiritual platform, we are bliss. That is the very fabric of our being, is bliss. Sat Chit Ananda. So without bliss, there's no wonder we're searching for intoxication here in this material world. We got to get our fix. But if we do it this way, we don't get out. And we never taste that spiritual pleasure, which is only available by interacting with in service to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Interacting with Him and His pure devotees. So, thank you so much for your kind attention. Maybe we can have some discussion in a few minutes. Yes, Prabhu? Julana Yatra.
Thank you for shining the light on this subject. There's so many different questions that I have, but I'll keep it short.
You can just put it a little close.
Thank you for shining the light on this subject. I have a lot of questions, but I'll keep it to a minimum. You said that from the Lord's genitals, is it grains?
Brains.
Brains.
Like rain.
Brains?
Rain.
Oh, rain. Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry. The other question that I have is, how do parents, it's auspicious to be born in a devotee family. But then there's requirements by society that make the parents go to work, and they have to let their kids go to public schools. And then in public schools, they're teaching things like sense gratification, sex education. I know that Planned Parenthood, which should be renamed Unplanned Parenthood. In Minnesota, they're enticing teenagers to come to a sex education camp, and they pay them $150 if they come join them. And it makes you think, well, gee, what could happen with that? You know, that's not a good thing. So I know that parents can't all homeschool their children. That's ideal. And it's very hard to do. The state makes it very hard. And they also need to make money and go to work. But they're letting their kids be raised by other people that are just materialists, that are mad after sense gratification. How are parents, how can they help their children when they're so far away in the school and while they're at work, and they have no idea who's teaching their kids this and that, which is mainly nonsense? How can they keep like a control on that?
Yeah, you're bringing up a really a troublesome part of situation in this Kali Yuga, and an important question to answer for, devotees. Because when we enter into family life, the knowledge is that we're meant to refrain from entering into family life deliberately, unless we're certain that we can deliver them from the cycle of birth and death, those dependents that we accept. I mean, that's the Shastra. It says, don't become a father, a mother, or its teacher. Don't become a leader unless you can deliver your dependents from the cycle of birth and death. So this is very important because we have to see, I have a duty to train them to help them go back to Godhead. And that should be the determination. So first step is parents must determine that determination. I have to do everything I possibly can by the grace of Krishna, following the guidance of the spiritual master, the guru, the shastras, sadhus, to help this soul who has a body which has been generated from my body go back to Godhead. Not that he's my child. This is a soul who has entered into this world, by the arrangement of the Lord through, somehow through my body. But this person is from Krishna Loka. This person is not from here. So I have to make it my determination, take him back, do everything I possibly can. So that determination will be harmonizing with the Shastras, with the Guru, with the Sadhu. And when we harmonize our will, our determination with them, then they help us to achieve that. As far as the details, it's a little bit case by case. But Prabhupada recommended that we can have Gurukulas, that we can raise our children, teach them arithmetic and reading and writing, and we can teach them the Shastras. They can become perfect men, gentlemen, ladies, and they'll understand the purpose of all this knowledge. We won't become distracted, right? So a householder has to think about what he wants in his life, because there's opportunities for full-time service for himself, his wife, and his children in the Krishna consciousness movement, in association with this temples and all the rest. And we just have to consider, are we willing to make the sacrifices for our personal comforts, if needed, to get the spiritual values in the forefront of their education, my wife's education, my activities, so forth, right? So these are big questions for each individual to address. And as a society, something we need to work towards is providing education and engagements for children. And there are many devotees that are taking this up. They would have much nicer things to answer to you. And they're very fired up to do it. So we'll try to do our little part, and maybe we can help those bigger initiatives in due course of time. So thank you so much, devotees. Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai. All glories to the assembled devotees.